Welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from the land that has recently been known as California. Thank you so much for listening. The conversation I have for you today is my first episode featuring a wine grower and maker from the UK, from England. How we connected is a special kind of serendipity. And then the fact that I recorded this conversation, it just worked out this way, with an Englishman on the 4th of July is another ironic kind of serendipity, since, for those of you who might not be from the U.S., it's a national holiday here that we celebrate the U.S. independence from England. In retrospect, it's clear that we may not have freed our minds or our culture when we freed our politics from colonial rule. But a more important question now may be the extent to which our minds are colonized by pathological ideologies that keep us separated from our inherent connection to the earth and to each other. I'll come back to this, but it provides a nice backdrop for some thoughts that I think happen to be much more timely now than I expected them to be. This is a little something I wrote that might be timely, or maybe I'm just becoming anachronistic, so please feel free to let me know your thoughts. My intention for this, though, is to be the most valuable wine growing insight you've ever heard. So here goes. For the past couple days, I've been hugging vines, and now that I've started, I don't think I'm going to stop. I have Hannah Carrick to thank. I work with Hannah. She encouraged this, and the vines here at Piscinus Ranch are as tall as me and taller, so they're perfect height for hugging. We've been training and leaf pulling, and I'm not hugging every vine, but every few vines before I start to work with it, I hug it. When Hannah suggested this, I was immediately open to try it. I mean, I have hugged a few trees, and that first vine was easy. But the second and the third vine started feeling a little awkward. I was thinking, am I going to be a vine hugger? Is this me now? I think I felt a little embarrassed. It was a public display of affection in a work environment. It felt too intimate, and that made me feel a little awkward. But I kept hugging that day, and I kept hugging today. It's not a brief, perfunctory hug that I give either. I wrap my arms around them, and I hold them to my heart. I close my eyes and lay my straw hat-covered head against the leafy cordons. I don't let go until I feel that feeling you get from a good hug. They need it, Hannah said, and I agreed. The vines have been under constant attack for months by one of the most adorable armies you can imagine, a vole army. Say what you will about the destructiveness of gophers and voles. They are so friggin' cute I wish I could adopt them all. And you probably wish I could too, if you have them in your vineyard. Alas, the voles have girdled many vines, and so we must discourage them with extreme prejudice. Some young vines are dead already. And while the vines have been dealing with this stress, the weather has been beastly. We left the vineyard when it was 101 degrees Fahrenheit today, but it got up to 105. This has been going on for a couple weeks now. As Olivia Rodrigo would say, it's brutal out here. If any vines ever needed a hug, these vines do. When I've hugged trees in the past, it has been a little different than hugging these vines. I've had the honor of hugging the largest tree in the world here in Sequoia National Park, and several of its siblings. I've hugged some breathtaking coastal redwoods in the Santa Cruz Mountains, trees older than me by orders of magnitude measured in millennia. Hugging those trees felt like an expression of my utmost respect and admiration, of gratitude, of course, but of starstruck, awe-filled wonder. Hugging these vines, on the other hand, felt like hugging a dear friend when you or they are wearied and weighed down with the burdens of life. Thankfulness and compassion and deeply felt care and commiseration, leaning on each other and letting go, resting and acknowledging. In his book, Plant Intelligence and the Imaginal Realm, the late Stephen Herod Buhner discussed what we've discovered about the minds of plants. And if that phrase itself, the mind of plants, makes you stiffen, you better buckle up and read Buhner's book. As it turns out, we have a nearly identical neural network to plants. Our minds function in almost exactly the same way. The major difference is that our neural network can grow no larger than the limits of our body, while the neural networks of plants can keep growing. Not too far from where I am right now, vines live that have been growing their neural networks since the 1800s. That seems really special to me, like something I should respect and learn from. When people would assert to Buhner that humans are the most intelligent life forms, he would joke, "How many humans have you met? Do you not watch the news?" His point wasn't necessarily to belittle human intelligence as much as to combat human exceptionalism. Human exceptionalism is a pernicious and deeply held belief that is embedded in our language and culture here in the U.S. and elsewhere. And I can't help but think that some of the awkwardness of hugging a tree or a vine for the first time comes from this. Yet this is a very new belief, and despite its overwhelming dominance in our culture, it is merely a belief. And like many of the beliefs that underpin our culture, it is being revealed more and more to be out of touch with the ecological realities of this world. A much older human belief, the oldest worldview actually, is that the earth and everything in it is alive and aware and sentient and capable of communication, and that the human is just one of the kin that sit in the circle of life. Transitioning to this perspective may be a lifetime process of decolonizing the self and maybe even learning or creating a new language for the way we farm. If you want to challenge your human exceptionalism, check out Buhner's book, Plant Intelligence in the Imaginal Realm. And if you haven't read Thus Spoke the Plant by Monica Galliano, which I've recommended here before, I wanted to tease you with some ideas from it. We all know that trees and plants communicate in the soil via the wood wide web of mycorrhizal networks. And we know that they communicate through the air using biochemical compounds. But in Thus Spoke the Plant, Galliano describes her study that shows that plants can still communicate when completely isolated from each other, sealed in separate boxes, and have no way of transmitting chemical signals. Galliano astonished the scientific world with an experiment in which she gave the sacred corn plant maize the opportunity to demonstrate its voice, and it did. Here's a passage from Thus Spoke the Plant. Quote, "In the midst of the rich symphony of nature, plants appear utterly silent. Because we are designed to believe our own perceptions, our human experience of their silence is so obvious and undeniable that we forget to question whether plants truly are as voiceless as we perceive them. Admittedly, without offering some proof of the plant voice, assuming we agreed on the definition of voice, we may rightly deem the question itself to be nonsense. However, to forget to ask the question, in effect, dismisses any chance of the proof to emerge. As a matter of fact, this is exactly what colonial ideologies of domination and manipulation have succeeded at. By scorning traditional knowledge as unsubstantiated and fanciful and erasing our ancestral memories that spoke of other possibilities, humanity has found itself locked inside the experimental box of a restraining socioculture view." End quote. She's talking about so much more than plants, of course. She continues, quote, "Like the plants in my experimental boxes, we are besieged by a barrier of emptiness designed to block any possibility of communication. From this viewpoint, of course, plants do not speak. The good news is that by simply asking the questions regarding vegetal speech, we are free to move away from the self-righteous slumber we have numbed our mind with. By merely asking the question about plant voice, we set ourselves free from the preconceived notion that construes plants as inevitably voiceless, and we open ourselves to observing plants as they actually behave and to discovering the reality we share. That's right, because voice is an intersubjective affair. Voice exists in the place of relation, the space between the self and the other, and it is what we bring to our encounters with plants that defines the quality of our communicative rendezvous, those we allow to speak or those we silence." End quote. What questions are we overlooking or refusing to ask in our wine cultures? And what do those unasked questions keep us enslaved to? Is it possible that hugging a vine is like asking the question of whether and how a plant communicates? Is a hug powerful enough to set ourselves free from our pathologically dissociated reductionism? Based on the way I started feeling as I hugged the vines, I think it's at least a start. As I was recently speaking with Kelly in the vineyard here at Piscinus Ranch, and I should say that's Kelly Mulville, and the vineyard here is his brainchild and baby, he was talking about how we've noticed some soil health indicators in the vineyard that we don't see in the rangeland around the vineyard. Kelly mentioned that there are, of course, maybe a lot of practical reasons for why this is happening. He planted cover crops and added compost when he first planted a section of the vineyard in 2017. We irrigate the vineyard. We grow plants here that don't grow in other parts of the ranch, namely thousands of grapevines. And these actions have many cascading results. But maybe there's more to it than just the practices Kelly suggested. Or maybe there's a different way of seeing those practices. Maybe we are beginning to see the cumulative effect of a concentration of human positive intention. We invest a lot of human time and energy here towards good ends. We shower the vines with hands-on expressions of desire for their health and greatest vitality. Maybe the plants, maybe the whole ecosystem, he said, responds to what we might call love. Now, I think we know at this point that everything we see and think of as the world of forms around us is actually all various manifestations of a unified cosmic or electromagnetic energy. Our world is a vast quantum entanglement of unpredictable, unreducible complexity. Another way of looking at it is that the physical is merely a facade over the metaphysical. Those practical things we do in the vineyard or orchard are inescapably spiritual. Our actions express our intentions and motivations and feelings in large and nuanced ways. So I'm beginning a journey of exploring the question of whether our intentions and motivations in farming have measurable outcomes on ecosystem health or even on productivity. My theory is that they do or could, and therefore that love is a really important and necessary part of the best farming. Love for the land, for the plants, the human and non-human community that engages with the farm. Not love of the money that they can make for you, not love of the status that they can confer to your ego, but love of them in themselves as beautiful, interconnected, diverse expressions of the underlying stuff that we all grow from. So much of what we do on our farms, with our vines and trees, can feel like work, like a means to a necessary end, even like obligations. Of course we want good things for our plants, but in the day-to-day of pruning, canopy management, pest management, etc., the actions we take can feel mechanical, clinical even, and unfeeling. But it's important to remind yourself that you are not just a fruit producer. You're a plant farmer. You are an ecosystem builder. You are, if you will, a passionate lover. There's an old story about two masons working together, laying bricks, who were asked what they were doing. The one was working quickly, but making, a few mistakes here and there and swearing a lot. He said, "I'm building a wall." The other was working a bit more slowly, but her craftswomanship was immaculate. She said, "I'm building the most beautiful cathedral in the world." They were both working on the same project. Though that story illustrates the way our mindset and perspectives changes us and the way we act in the world. And if that's all that we get out of our perspective shift on our farm practices, well, great. But what if that perspective shift is applied to other living creatures and not just bricks? What if our intentions impacted the things that grow on our farms? Is it possible that love may be the most important tool we have to improve our farming? A recent study in Australia has shown that when plants in the study were lightly touched, it caused them to change the expression of thousands of genes, a dramatic physiological reaction that started within minutes of the stimulus and stopped within a half an hour. That is, the plants sensed and responded to touch. If I haven't lost you yet, then I hope you won't think me too crazy for suggesting we all consider doing a little more vine and tree hugging, and maybe whisper a little something into the ear of that vine while you're doing it. A little expression of gratitude for being part of your world. Maybe a secret you can't tell anyone else. Whatever you feel, let them feel your heart. Maybe, like me, you are actually able to make a living and survive because of their existence, and maybe it's worth acknowledging that to them. But then, after you do, don't forget to listen. Don't forget to ask them if they have anything to say. We may find they've been trying to talk to us for a long time. And if the importance of love to farming is a topic that interests you, I've started a thread in the Beyond Organic Wine Google group where I hope anyone who has any studies related to this can post, and we can have a discussion and about how our intentions and motivations and energy may influence the health of our farms and ultimately be something we can taste in our wines. If you aren't a member of the Beyond Organic Wine Google group, just log into Google, go to groups, and search for Beyond Organic Wine as all one word, no spaces between the words, just Beyond Organic Wine, and just ask to join. I'll add you to the group, and you can add your thoughts and findings, or start a new thread with your own questions. And please feel free to contact me at connect@organicwinepodcast.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Now, it's my pleasure to present this conversation with Robin Snowdon of Limeburn Hill Vineyard. Limeburn Hill Vineyard is an innovative ecological vineyard near Chew Magna on the edge of Bristol. It is the only biodynamic vineyard in the southwest of England and one of only a handful in the UK. In addition to farming biodynamically, Robin and his partner Georgina Harvey have a vision of their farm as a nature preserve and really want to approach the land as a living being. that we can care for and also connect with. Robin talks of dancing grasses and trees and vines, trellised at a height that little sheep can graze beneath, with foxes and rabbits, and a vineyard full of wildflowers. And they attempt to build a system only with what grows naturally on the land. He discusses having an intuitive, emotional connection with the land and our opportunity as farmers to help it achieve its greatest potential. He talks about how integrating ruminants brings joy to the land and those who visit it, and how that joy translates into the wine. They're growing some really interesting grapes, hybrids that we don't have here in the US, some of them. And we talk about their winemaking and how their approach to not letting anything go to waste results in some really interesting approaches to wine, and how small is beautiful and sustainable in an approach to wine business. I was very unfair to Robin at one point near the end, and I asked him to speak as an Englishman for the influence that England has had on the wine world. Despite this unfair question, Robin answered beautifully, and I think you'll find this is no different from his responses to everything else I asked him. Enjoy. Robin, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
And could you introduce yourself and where you are in the world and your winery?
Of course. Yes, so we are just south of the city of Bristol, which is in the southwest of England, so in the UK. So quite a new vineyard wine culture here.
Yeah.
The vineyard itself is just a few miles outside of the city. It's quite a forward-thinking city, Bristol,
Hmm.
which is really an amazing kind of serendipity for us because of the way that we work. There's a lot of people here who are interested in the way that we work, so it's a fantastic place to be. It's maybe a little bit like America. There's this sort of the southwest coast side of things with people who are perhaps trying to find new ways of doing things, or historically
Mm.
have anyway. And it's the same in the UK. You go down Somerset, Devon, Dorset, Cornwall, down in the southwest. You still have that kind of different communities setting up, doing new things, and trying new ways. So it's a great place to set up a vineyard.
Nice, kind of like a little on the outskirts of the empire, so to speak, far enough away from
Yes.
from London to start to be doing your own thing, kind of exploring other ideas and other ways.
Yeah. Yes, and actually it's quite interesting because climatically the southeast of England is the warmest part and the driest part, and so many people would say most suitable to growing grapes. But the southwest has this sort of I think diversity. I feel of climate as well, which is really interesting. So you get some very windy areas, some wetter areas, some more lovely sheltered microclimates. Um, and it's a very diverse geography. So soils, geology, wildlife, habitat, that sort of thing is very diverse in the southwest. So it all makes for quite a artisanal, I suppose, potential for a
Mm,
newish industry.
nice. And Limeburn Hill Vineyard is your winery and vineyard. That's right?
That's right. Yes, Limeburn Hill. That's the name of the hill that we're on. Yeah.
And what is that microclimate geology like there?
Well, we're on a south-facing slope. Um, we are between a ridge of hills, which is called the Dundry Ridge, which is just to the north of us, and the Mendips, which are the other side of which is Glastonbury. If you've ever heard of the Glastonbury Festival,
Hmm.
so we're in a smallish valley with a man-made reservoir in it, built in the 1950s. So yeah, it's nicely sheltered. A lot of rain gets dropped on the hills to the south of us before it hits us, which is quite good. Um, the soil is clay loam, layers of clay loam over limestone. So we sort of have bands of limestone running through the hill. And so the profile of the vineyard itself is this quite interesting sort of scalloped form where you get layers of limestone and then you get a steeper bit that shallows out until you get another layer of limestone and then you get another scallop. It's quite a well-known hill form along the limestone ridges in England.
Gotcha. Is that the white limestone that is like, common to Dover, the cliffs of Dover and stuff like that, or is it a different kind of
That's
limestone?
the chalk. Yeah, so
Okay.
that's limestone ridge runs from the southwest of England, sort of northeast,
Okay.
up through to the north of England, and then the chalk bits, which are to the Downs, which is where there's lots of vineyards in the southeast, and the White Cliffs of Dover. That's all chalk.
Gotcha. Nice. Well, you guys are a unique spot in the Southwest as well. The only biodynamic certified vineyard. Are you in that area? And one of only six in all of England, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Something like that, yes. I think it does tend to vary, but it's
Yeah.
yes, 5 to 8, something like that. Yes.
Okay.
In
Gotcha.
fact, some information, some data came out from the main wine society in the UK today, and so we've got 1,000 vineyards in the UK now. Um, when we started 10 years ago, there were 200. So that tells
Wow.
you the sort of the shift that's happening here.
I was gonna
Um,
ask. That's crazy.
and of those 1,000 vineyards, there are about 5 or 6 of us who are biodynamic.
Wow. Wow. Well, you mentioned. I want to get into that. What you're growing and how you're growing it and what it's like growing it there and everything. But as a lead into that, one of the first things you were saying to me was that you're very passionate about this stuff. And why are you passionate about it? What are you passionate about, and what incites that passion? How does that come out in what you're doing? Why you're doing what you're doing?
Mm, that's a nice question. Um, I suppose. I suppose when I was a kid, I lived in a big city, Sheffield, up in Yorkshire, and I used to spend every spare moment I had out in the countryside, whether it was bird watching or fishing or just tickling trout in streams and counting butterflies, that sort of thing. And I just absolutely loved it, and it's such a big part of my life for so many years.
Hmm.
And since then I've been so sort of drawn to nature, to wildlife, and it was always my dream. Well, this not a dream as such, but it was always this amazing idea that you could live in a nature reserve. And I
Hmm.
think I only realised this last year, after we've had the vineyard now for nearly 10 years, that's what we've created. We've created a nature reserve
Yeah.
that also produces wine.
Yeah.
And I think that is the absolute joy of what we do, to bring as much life to the place that we are, so that when I walk through, there are woodpeckers and there are butterflies and there are so many different species of birds. We've
Mm.
identified 63 species of birds on the vineyard so far, and this
Mm.
is a 4 acre field, so it's a tiny vineyard. Um,
That's amazing.
yeah, and you walk through at the moment, and there are clouds of butterflies, and yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. I think that's what really gets me excited. All
Oh
of my
God.
love goes into making this place full of life, and that comes through in the wines, I think. But not that wasn't the intention. That wasn't the logic. It was just we make it as lifeful and diverse and vibrant as possible. Um, and hopefully that will come through in the wines, and we found that it does.
That's lovely. Yeah. I mean, it's that diversity that sort of the birds are such a great indicator of that. Um, yeah, with that, and comes challenges, of course, right? You invite everything in, and biodiversity can make it hard to have a cash crop because, it's also food for so many of those things that are that you're inviting in. How do you balance that? Like what are you finding in terms of the challenges of balancing, that biodiversity
Mm,
with production?
mm. So the key word there really is balance in almost all contexts. So I suppose um, our one of the main principles that we work with is which is a basic principle of biodynamics, is that you're not looking to kill things. So you're looking to find a natural balance as far as you can. Now, obviously, when you're working with vines, it's an agricultural system, so it isn't nature. but you're trying to bring as much diversity in as possible, so that over time they can establish this sort of balance. So examples would be, we had light brown apple moth on the vines after about 4 or 5 years. I don't know if you know that it's a little moth. It lays its eggs in the clusters of grapes, and the larvae hatch and eat the grapes from the inside as the bunches close. And then you think you've
Oh
got a
boy.
healthy bunch of grapes, and then it falls to pieces when you pick it when you harvest.
Uh,
Um,
I don't know it
so what we
yet, but
did
I'm sure
was
I will.
it's similar to grapeberry moth, I think. If you've heard of that,
Okay.
that's a bit more common, I
Yes.
think, in the other parts of Europe. But we have lots of cider
Yes.
here,
Yeah.
so we have lots of apple trees. So we have lots of the moths associated with apple trees.
Got it.
Yeah, and so we put up. We've done everything we can to provide habitat for insectivorous birds like blue tits or great tits or robins, and also for bats. So we
Mm.
have 7 different bat species on the vineyard now, and we found that we have always have some damage from the moth, but very little. So they're there, but the numbers are kept low, because the bats eat the moths, and the insectivorous birds eat the larva. So that's
Uh-huh.
one of our approaches. Um, I suppose the other thing that at harvest we have a situation we weren't expecting it. No one told us this might happen, but we lost almost all of one variety to birds one
Yeah.
harvest. Um, and so, what do? We bits of metal hanging up, bits of foil and CDs, and do you get scarers up and all this sort of thing. In the end, we thought the best thing to do is we'll spend 50 weeks of the year encouraging the birds, and then two weeks of the year netting.
Right.
So we net the whole vineyard now. So we've
Yeah.
got we've created a trellising system whereby we can run sort of 3 meter wide nets along each of the rows, and we just carabiner them to a high wire. So you can set it up a couple of weeks before harvest on one variety, and then after harvest you take it down, and then you can set it up on another variety when that becomes ripe, and so on.
Right.
I suppose the other main thing would be deer. We have a herd of deer, which the farm is on the foraging route, and they would strip everything, so they would take everything. So we have to have a deer fence.
Okay.
That's really the only way. We have a large area of woodland where the deer can live, and they breed, and they have little fawns, but we can't let them in the vineyard.
It's and do you have any um rodent pests? Like any sort of ground rodents?
Not seriously, no. We have
Okay.
rabbits,
Yeah,
um,
rabbits, sure.
but we have so much. Yeah, only half of the field is planted with vines. The rest is planted with, or either planted or naturally established trees and shrubs and scrub and meadow. And um, so when we first planted, there were no rabbits. The more we cared for the land, the more rabbits arrived, because there was so much for them to eat. But they weren't that interested in the vines. There was so much else for them to eat. But we had
Okay.
quite a healthy rabbit population. And then the foxes arrived. And so the foxes have kept the rabbits down. So now we have a family of foxes, and we have a smaller family of rabbits, shall we say.
Fantastic. And
But
is
rodent wise, as soon as we started caring for the meadow, because it was originally a pasture, we planted it with vines,
yes.
and it was overgrazed, very little life there at all. As we started sort of managing the meadow using in a kind of to create this sort of matrix of different meadow types. So some of it cut every year, some of it's cut twice a year, some of it's scythed and removed, some of it is scythed and left to create this diversity of flora. Suddenly, you get this incredible influx of voles and mice, and as soon as they
Right.
arrived, all of the higher bird predators arrived as well. So we have barn owls and little owls and tawny owls and sparrowhawks and kestrels, and they're all living here now.
Huh.
But no,
Great.
there's no other than rabbits. There's no real rodent problem here.
Did you have to do anything with your deer fence to allow foxes access to the vineyard?
Um, Apparently not. No.
They're
That's
very
really fun. Do
crafty.
you know, I've never actually thought of that. Do you know they run through the fence? They run straight through the
Okay.
holes. Yeah. So the
Wow.
holes are large enough for foxes to get through. We have a
Perfect.
badger set on the vineyard as well, and they just dig underneath it. So
Right.
I mean, however deep you dig it, a badger will go deeper. So
Right.
um,
Right.
yeah, but foxes just run at the fence and go straight through it. Actually, I hadn't thought of
Wow,
that.
that's lovely. Well, when you were talking about this idea of a nature preserve, like, and what you've realized you're helping to create there, I mean, I can you talk about what the sensation of that is? Like, what is it? How is that different from what we might think of as conventional agriculture? Like, it's a
Mm.
leading question because I have this same desire in a way that there's something immersive about the experience that I want to create. If I have a piece of land that I'm building, an agricultural system on, I don't want it to be this thing that we're used to seeing. Like I want it to feel more like a preserve, like you said,
Mm.
like a forest, like a park, like something more along those lines. But can you talk about that from your perspective?
Yes, I'll do my best. Um, I suppose there's one thing is that there's constant movement.
Mm,
There's always meadow. There's always long grass. There's always big trees. There's always and anytime there's even the slightest movement of wind, the whole thing begins to sort of dance.
yeah.
We grow the vines in a particular way that doesn't hold them in place. So we use I think you know the a sort of an adaptation of the Geneva double curtain system. So the vines are grown quite high, so almost all the year they just wave in the wind. So there's always this movement. So it's the whole the whole like today is a really windy day, so it's really beautiful to be out there today in the sun, because there's the grass
Mm,
is being blown down, the butterflies are going across, and you see the vines move. And I think this what's really special is we've grown some vines up trees to try and see how they look, how they act when they're growing in a more of their sort of evolutionary environment. And you see them coming out of the tree, and they move in exactly the same way that they move as they do on the trellising system that we've created. So there's something about connecting back to, I suppose it's connecting back to the basic, what's the word, form and structure and movement of the vine. So what that
mm,
vine wants to do, how it wants to move, how it's evolved to move, I think is the key. So we see that as it is in a tree, and then when you see it again in the trellising system, there's this, it sort of clicks. It's like someone sounds a bell or something, and it's just like, oh, that's right. That's how it wants to be. It doesn't want to be clamped together between wires. Um,
mm.
and also, we find there's all these benefits, as I'm sure you know, to this sort of system. But one thing is we find that the shoots tend to be a bit shorter, so
Oh,
we don't have to trim them back or anything like that, because they're always being buffeted by the wind. The vine recognizes that, and it doesn't keep growing out. It tends to make the internodal distance a bit shorter. So there's actually less shading and um, less connecting across the rows actually between the vines.
right. What is your spacing?
The rows are 3 meters. The between the vines is 1.5 meters. So
Got
that's
it.
what's that, 5 foot between
Yeah.
the vines, and I don't know what that is. 10 foot? I can't remember. I'm not sure.
Yeah. 3 meters, 12, I'd say. Is that right? Yeah. Wait, no, you're right. 10. Sorry.
Three,
Yeah. Yeah.
nine to 10, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And it works. Yeah, it works really well, actually. Although we have developed that slightly now.
And
Um,
are you intentionally planting any other crops in the understory of that vineyard, or is it? I mean, beyond cover crops. I mean, do you seed cover crops, or have you let things sort of take over natural succession now, or what's happening there?
Yeah, we've never planted any cover crops. No,
Okay.
I think the biggest mistake that we made was when we started, because we don't come from a winemaking or a viticulture background. We spoke to as many people as we could. Everybody said plough your field.
Right.
So we ploughed the field, and it was the biggest mistake that we made because it just messed up the soil so much.
Huh.
And uh, so what we wanted to do after that was we wanted to just allow it to rest and to settle and to develop on its own. So we didn't want to seed anything. And what's happened because of the way that we've managed it, because we haven't had to cut the grass all the time because of the high trellising system, we've got this incredible diversity of wildflowers. It's really beautiful at the moment. So many wildflowers, and a lot of the vineyard we don't cut under the vines at all. The meadow goes up to maybe a metre, and the vines are fruiting at about 1.5 meters above ground. So you get airflow even with the long grass. So
Yeah.
we've certainly found over the last 10 years that diversity has increased. Um,
Right.
we've got some quite rare plants there, and they've just arrived. Um,
Huh.
yeah, I think the
Yeah.
cover cropping, we've decided not to cover crop, partly because of it's a good use of machinery, and we've got quite a steep slope, and because it's a clay soil, we want to put as little machinery on it as possible.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that we we're trying to run the whole sort of system in a way that only works with what's there or what wants to be there, and so we're trying to do all the treatments for the vines only from what's growing on the land,
Right.
and also only if animals come in, they come in. If birds come in, they come in. If flowers come in, then that's what we go with. In the same way that we have that approach to the wines, we want the wines to only express that particular piece of land. So we want to bring in as little as possible. So it comes back to that principle in biodynamics, which is the idea of the vineyard as a self-sustaining individuality, as an organism in its own right. You don't want to keep stuffing it full of other things from elsewhere. You want it to sort of be self-sufficient, and be as of itself as it's possible to be.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really lovely. You don't know how uh, similar to my own way of thinking that actually is. I just actually released a podcast last night that said very similar things to what you're saying. um,
Oh, really?
yeah, it's really funny. Yeah, well, so
Yeah.
it must be
And that's one of the
beautiful.
reasons that I really wanted to talk to you, actually,
Yeah,
because
exactly. Well,
a lot of the
I mean,
things that you've said, I suddenly thought that's really, really chimes with what we do here.
oh, well, wait till you listen to what I released yesterday. um, I mean, the just the intro. I mean, where it's me talking about my own sort of vision of wine, but the interview is fantastic as well. It's about wine as art. But yeah,
Mm,
we'll have to chat again after you check that out. And it's
mm,
worth saying, the sort of serendipitousness of us connecting was so strange and surreal, but I'm starting to, expect these things. So maybe it didn't even feel as strange and surreal as it probably was. But, it was literally, I had thought, I'm forgetting why I thought about the Geneva. Oh, I just talked to somebody in Washington who's growing
mhm.
um, growing a really unique vineyard there without sprays, and they use a Geneva double curtain. And I just started researching a Geneva double curtain to get a sense of what it would look like. And so I was doing Google image searching and found a really great diagram of a Geneva double curtain and clicked on it to go to the page just to see it in a bigger thing. And that page was on your website, and I started reading. I was wait a minute, this is a really cool video. Where is this? And reached out to you guys, and it was like so strange. And then yeah, there we had all these other connections as well. This
Yeah. Oh, that's so nice you found that diagram.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah. And well, so right now you must be in the glory of midsummer, like having light until 11 p.m. at night, probably, or if not later, and sort of magical summer days, long, like endless summer days. Is that what's happening right now?
Today feels like that. Yes, you're
Okay.
absolutely right. Um, I think it's probably more like 10 now. The
10. Okay.
sunset's about 10:15. But
Okay.
yeah, I think if you go a bit further north, up into Scotland, then you get the much later sunsets.
Right.
However, tomorrow is going to be torrential rain and strong winds.
Oh boy.
So it's this
Nice.
is one of the things with England is yes, it's you. There's no consistency to the weather,
Yeah.
which means that every single vintage is so different. It's so
Yeah.
interesting, and the challenges every year are different. I did expect there to be a little bit more consistency when we planted, and that we might it might be out of sync every few years or something. But no, not a single year has been the same in the last decade. So
Yeah.
it's taught me a lot of patience, a lot of acceptance, but
Yeah.
and there's a real pleasure in it as well, because now we've had I mean, we're such a young vineyard. We've had 6 vintages now, and every one has been good, and everyone has been different. And I think that's the thing that we've learned. If you follow these kind of this approach that we follow, uh, then the wines will be good, but you will, when you let go of control of them, you really have to trust it. Um,
Yeah.
and now, after this length of time, we can trust it because we know it works. But yeah, it was nerve wracking to start with, should we say? But yeah,
Mm.
so if we've had for example, we've been selling our a pet nat rosé, which is called Lamas. We've been selling that at 8.5% ABV, so alcohol level, and then we've
Yeah.
also had it at 12% ABV, and that's simply the difference in the years.
Right. I love that. I mean, I think that's one of the special things about expressing a land through a fermented beverage. It's this like, yeah,
Mm.
uniqueness. It's a time capsule that that can never be repeated.
Mhm.
And yeah, so yeah, I like that. That's one of its strengths to me. It's a feature, not a flaw, as far as I'm concerned. Um, I
Yes,
also
absolutely.
I love.
It's a
Oh, go ahead.
place capsule as well. I think that's the thing.
A place, right? Time and place capsule. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I should mention that I really appreciate you talking about the movement of the plants. I don't think anybody on the podcast has really spoken about plant movement in the way that you did and evoked the sense of them being very active participants, dancing in this landscape.
Mhm.
And have you done any delving into these ideas of plant sentience and their anything related to that?
Not as such. I think I think when I've spent a lot of I've spent a lot of my time sitting down looking at plants, just being
Yes.
with plants. And I think you begin to. It doesn't take long when you open yourself up to it to be able to recognize that there is a communication, that there is a sentience, there is um, a connection between plants, between animals and plants, between humans and animals and plants. Um, so I think I've experienced that myself, as opposed to found any research about it. Saying that, there was one, I'll never forget a scene from one of David Attenborough's nature programs about plants many years ago, and
Uh-huh.
he did this incredible stop motion of blackberry growing, and when it
Yeah.
sends its tendrils out, and they go up to a certain height, and then it's almost like the tips turn and look like a water snake in the water, so it's sticking its head out and
Mm.
looking, and when it senses that there's something close by, it moves towards it. And
Wow.
when I remember, I'll never forget seeing that. It was just, so that plant is absolutely communicating with the world, and it's
Yeah.
got a purpose, and it's really going for it. And when you realise that, and if you apply that across all of plant life, then yeah, you get a sense of it. Yeah, in biodynamics, I think they talk about it as a plant having an impulse. So the impulse of a nettle is to grow in a certain way, or an oak tree is to grow in a certain way, or a vine is to grow in a certain way. And I connect that with the idea that we all have our impulses, whatever they might be, and you can kind of almost imagine that a plant, you can kind of transpose that onto a plant. And you see it. You see, the way that vines grow up trees, or brambles grow through hedges, or yeah, comfrey grows, for example, in the vineyard. Yeah, it's that sentience. I think I see it in plants and animals, obviously, and you can feel it in animals. I can think you can when you get close to a wild animal or a domestic animal. Actually, say we've just got some sheep in the vineyard, for example. The more you get to know them, the more you begin to be in tune with the way that they are feeling, the way that they move, what they want, and you know what they're going to do next, and you know how they will react without them actually doing anything. So you can have this connection with other non-human parts of the world. We have that ability. It's not a. I don't think it's complicated. Anybody with a pet knows that. Um, but also, I think the lovely thing that I found in going back to that idea of the vineyard or the land as being a being or having its own spirit, is that if you work with that as a idea, then you can have that relationship with the land as well. So you can
Yeah.
have an intuitive, communicative, sort of emotional connection with the land, and you can begin to understand what that land um, would benefit from. And I think that really that's what underpins everything that we do, is this idea of trying to understand the land as a being and allowing it to achieve helping it to achieve its potential as a living being, which totally changes the relationship of farmer and land. It's more like caring for a friend or a child or something.
And I also think that there's something really profound about as you stay on that land and eat from that land and drink from that land, you actually become that land. Like what you are made of is is that land in a real way after not too
Mm,
long. If especially if the foods that you're eating are coming specifically from that land. There's a I feel like it is one of the ways to understand and communicate is to transform that energy into yourself, and or not that you're doing it,
mm,
but to be part of that process where the land transforms into you.
mm,
Seems really exciting, and transforms your relationship with the idea of eating and drinking and the production of your foods and beverages too. I think when you realize that, whether you are on land that you own or whether you're becoming part of a regional food system, when you begin to realize that you are that land as well, like it is you. It's a really profound connection that you build when you are doing it with with the intention of communicating with the land and relating to it. um
yeah, very much so. Yes, that's quite beautiful. It's not just a sort of a emotional or a communication between you and the land. It's actually you become the land.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I was going to
yes,
ask
that's
you,
really, really lovely.
you mentioned sheep. I was going to ask, since you have the high trellis there, if you are using any animals. So it sounds like you bring sheep in. It's not a very big vineyard, so I imagine they come in temporarily. Are they your sheep? Do you borrow sheep? How does that work?
We've had them since January. They're
Okay.
our sheep.
Okay.
They are, I think, officially the smallest breed in the world. They are Wesson, which is from
Okay.
a little island, or the Ile de Wesson of the coast of Brittany in France.
Spelled with an
Um,
O. Starts with an O, right?
it's O U no OEUSSANT.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
think
that's
that's
what it is.
right. OEU, yeah. That comes from the French for west.
Gotcha.
And yeah, so the story is that sailors sort of put some sheep, larger sheep, on this island, and then just every time they sailed past over the years, they would pick one and have it for dinner. But these sheep then evolved to survive on this island. So windswept, so southwesterly gales coming in, so the sheep evolved to get smaller and smaller and hardier and hardier. And so now they're about 45 centimeters high, something like that,
Wow.
at full grown. And so they're very small. So it means that where our fruiting wires are about 1.5 meters, so they can be in there, potentially in there quite a lot. Although they are a primitive breed, which means they do feel sort of half sheep, half goat. So
Okay.
they've already learned to stand on their back legs and eat the leaves, and they've started pulling some of the canes off. So they've just in the last couple of weeks they've started that. So I think we'll probably have to move them out of the vineyard now,
Right.
until after harvest. Although the we are developing the trellising system in such a way that we should be able to have them in all year round.
Would
So I
would
think
would another half meter of height take care of that? Like if you were at 2 meters instead of meter and a half?
possibly, yeah. Although I think at 2 meters, if you grow them up at 2 meters, they still come down. So what that would do is it would probably give you an extra few weeks until the
Gotcha.
shoots get long enough for the sheep to reach, and then they would pull them again. So what we're looking at is in sort of developing the Geneva double curtain, so that but instead of having two cordons, we have a central cordon and then grow them out to the Geneva double curtain wires, the fruiting wires. So those become tucking in wires. And so you end up with them growing in a big V shape, well, approximately anyway. And so that means that it would encourage the growth upwards. It would take probably the whole season for it to get long enough to come down to ground. So I think in future we might move to that trellising system. That's quite a big ask to change your trellising system, but we may end up with that. I think because the sheep have brought an energy and a joy to the land, which I didn't realise was missing. And Georgina, my wife, and I, we decided to have them, and mainly to help work with meadow and bring a bit of an additional sort of composting mechanism. But they bring such a different type of life to the land. It's so beautiful,
Yeah.
and everybody loves them.
Yeah.
They interact with people, and they bring a joy to the land. And I think the more joy you bring to the land, the more joy you have in your wine. I
Yeah.
think it's yeah. So we actually probably going to adapt the vineyard to suit the sheep as opposed to changing the sheep or moving the sheep. That's a slightly longer term process, I think.
Right. Right. Um, yeah, but I mean,
It's that
maybe.
there's something about the energy of a ruminant. Yeah, that ruminant energy that you get with sheep and cows that you don't get from uh, sort of wildlife. You don't get from strimming or scything or mowing. It's
Yeah.
it's this almost halfway between human and wildlife, and
Yeah.
it's just such a lovely energy. And it's like this niche has been filled.
Yeah.
Of course, the world had herbivores all over it, didn't it?
Yeah.
Keeping the forests and the grass down. Yeah, so it's nice to bring that back.
Yeah. Yeah. That's lovely. Yes, I can't agree more. Now, the grapes that you're growing, I think you have what, 5 varieties there?
We've got 8 varieties now. Yeah.
8 varieties. Okay. I was just reading on your
Yes.
site
Yeah.
and I only counted, but I didn't count them all. Can we talk about some of them? I know you're growing Orion, Sauvignon Blanc, Regent, Rondo. Um, I know you have Pinot Noir. What else do you have?
We have Solaris,
Solaris
and we have Johanniter, and a newer variety called Sauvignac.
and Sauvignac. Yeah. Now, all
Yeah,
of those but Pinot Noir are hybrids. Is that right?
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, and we are in the
Orion.
process, hopefully, of moving away from the Pinot Noir.
Okay.
I did a
That is.
calculation a couple of years ago that I spend about 5 times as much time on a block of Pinot Noir as I do on the entire rest of the vineyard. Uh, and
Um,
that's it's insane, really. It's not a sustainable grape to grow. If you don't want to use chemicals, it's not a sustainable grape to grow.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm really excited by some of the varieties that you're growing. Do you have any favorites? I mean, I know Orion has Villard Blanc in it, which is it's known here because it has Pierce's disease resistance naturally.
Okay.
So that's, we here in the southeast of the U.S. and southern U.S. and now even into the southwest, we're getting glassy wing sharpshooters with Pierce's disease. So these kind of things are become more valuable. And like if you're in Texas or Georgia, the southern states that are growing wine here, you pretty much have to grow varieties with resistance to Pierce's disease. Otherwise, you won't have a vineyard after a couple of years. So that's exciting. Orion, I'd love to hear more about that. And Rondo, Orion's a white, I believe, and Rondo is a red that I kind of love because I know some folks here who are focusing on Austrian varieties and are doing biodynamic regenerative agriculture with Austrian varieties in California and making natural wine very similar to you. And they might be really interested in Rondo because of its parentage, including Saint Laurent. And so, anything that you want to talk about, any of your grapes you have, I just wanted to mention those two, which sound really exciting.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I think I've had some really wonderful conversations with Deirdre Heekin from La
Yeah,
Garagista about hybrids and about how you can work with them and what they bring that sort of the more conventional varieties may not have because they've been hybridized. I think there's a really wonderful view. I think that's a really wonderful view that she takes, which I think is very helpful because hybrids tend to have been seen as a bit of a sort of second class set of varieties. But actually, I think if you work with them in the way that suits them, in the same way that you need to work with your land for the best of its potential, you need to learn how to work with the particular varieties in a way that suits them to bring out the best. And we found the Orion, for example, if we do some skin contact fermentation with that, and the flavors that come out and the aromas that come out are really absolutely beautiful. And it's created a wine which I've never tasted one like it before. It makes a beautiful sort of. We make a sparkling ancestral method with the Orion, and the flavors that come through are just gorgeous. And it also seems to age really really nicely. The flavors develop over time. I say we only had it for a few years, so we don't know what happens after 10 years. But after maybe 3 or 4 years, the flavors have really moved on, full of floral aromas to start with, lots of bright fruit. And then over the next couple of years, the fruit tends to lose a little, and you get some wonderful savory flavors coming through, which means it's the most beautiful wine for food. So I think I really like Orion. Um, Funnily enough, it's a variety that no one plants anymore. So I tried to get
hmm.
some from a supplier from Volker Freitag in Germany, who's one of the main hybrid growers, and he said they can't get any
Huh.
because people are growing. They're not planting it anymore. They're planting Bacchus in general. Um,
Huh.
so I think the case was that Orion came out, and then relatively soon after that, a variety called Phoenix came out. I think this is right. And Phoenix is based on Bacchus. So Bacchus is quite a well-known grape. It's planted a lot in England now. Nearly 10% of England is Bacchus, and
Right, I've heard about that.
but it's still disease susceptible.
Yeah.
And Phoenix came out as a disease-resistant hybrid that had some Bacchus in it, and so people started planting Phoenix instead of Orion, which was a disease-resistant hybrid.
Hmm.
And so yeah, so the amount of Orion stock has gone right down. So I think we're quite lucky to have it
Yeah.
because it makes a beautiful still wine and a beautiful sparkling wine as well.
Beautiful. The
The
other,
Rondo as a
yeah.
grape is a bit more. I mean, it's a more difficult grape to work with. It's very high yielding.
Okay.
It can have a tendency to ripen to a very high level while still having quite high acidity. And sometimes
Mm,
the acidity won't drop quite enough, and yet, so making a well balanced natural Rondo still wine, for example, I think is quite difficult.
uh-huh.
I think putting it into a blend is quite good. We use it in a sparkling red,
Okay.
so we co-ferment that with Regent and sometimes another variety, Solaris, which is a white variety, to make a sparkling red. But those two, Regent and Rondo, are Temporier grapes, so they have coloured juice,
Right.
which means that the colour of the wine is almost black. It's amazing colour.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, a lot
It's
I've
an
noticed
interesting one.
yeah, I've noticed a lot of hybrids are. And I think the other unique thing that I meant to mention about Rondo is the cross is that's not vinifera is Amurensis, Vitis amurensis, which is an Asian native grape from Russia, China.
Mm.
Not, a lot of the hybrids came from North America that I often think of, I guess, maybe my own North American centrism. but yeah, that's kind of a unique one in that sense as well. So it's kind of fun, like
It
getting
is,
a little
yeah.
more, even more.
And I think the breeder, um, yes, they've worked with a few since then as well. So Solaris is Vitis amurensis with a cross with a lot of Riesling in its heritage. And there's one that's
Right,
grown quite a
right.
lot in Switzerland. Now I think the Swiss name for it is Ravel Blanc. It has
Mm,
another name which I
yeah,
can't remember, and that is Vitis amurensis with Cabernet Sauvignon. But it's got the white aspect of the Sauvignon in it, so it's a white grape,
right.
uh, and they're all extreme. They're all very high yielding, very disease resistant, and sort of, I think, surprisingly easy to ripen. So early ripening because of their vigor, they really
Mm,
go for it. Um, I think the Solaris, I think you can make a lovely wine from. It's very good for more northern climates. So it's planted in Denmark and Sweden. Um,
right.
you get vineyards there where you get much shorter summers, and
Yeah,
even in hotter climates, even in the hotter parts of the UK, it can become a bit too overripe and not develop quite enough um, sort of diversity of flavour in the
gotcha.
wines.
Yeah,
And
I had
Rondo
a,
probably would be similar. I would say you need a relatively cool climate for it.
yeah, I had a couple lovely Danish Solaris wines that were, yeah,
Mm.
kind of be very excited about it. At least, coming from that area. Um, you, it's interesting. I mean, we talk about the natural winemaking. I'm just thinking about some of these things. Not that you have to make uh, a varietal wine at all from any grape. In fact, it's probably probably a good idea not to in many cases. But and because of that, I'm thinking a lot of times with these high alcohol uh, and high acid grapes, which can be a thing with some hybrids, they seem to be the perfect thing to blend with non-grape things. So things that might be lower acid and higher, lower bricks kind of things, where you're sort of watering back the wine with, whatever it is, whether it's apples or something that's like a lower acid, lower alcohol thing, and you end up with balance through blending multiple fruits. I know you guys interesting things with your with your grapes, but yeah,
Mm.
have you played around with anything like that?
No, not really.
Okay.
Uh, a little bit of experimenting here and there. I think, to be honest, that was one of the ideas that we thought we might play with. Um,
Yeah.
but I think all of our ideas when we started, I don't think we followed any of them through. So all of the plans that we had at the beginning, what wines we would make, how much we would make, and the methods of making, none of them have happened. So everything has just followed a totally different path, and it's been so lovely because of that.
That's
And
great.
that's taught us a lot. What we have, yeah. So the way that our changes, I suppose, in from those original ideas have happened is, um, in relation to other fruit is that we now collect all of the wine that we disgorge, all of the sediment and the extra. We lose about 10 to 15% of each bottle when we take the sediment out, when we disgorge the bottles, and we collect that, and we are lucky enough to have the only biodynamically certified distillery in the UK, in
Wow.
Bristol next to us,
Wow.
and so they distill it, and we make an eau de vie de vin from the wines, but then we take some of that and we macerate quince, just fresh quince, in that, and that creates this beautiful, naturally sweet, um, quince
Right.
eau de vie de vin, I suppose,
Right. So
which is
not
lovely.
fermented,
It's a way.
just as a flavoring component and a sugar component, not as it's not you're not fermenting the quince.
No, no. We tried to get enough juice out of the quince to create a quince, like a quince cider, effectively, but it would have been tons and tons and tons of quince, and we've got one tree, so it was never gonna work. We did try, and we got almost nothing from it. So, uh, but when you hold a quince, so when you look at it and when you smell it, there's nothing like it.
Yeah.
And it's not native to England at all, but it's a big part of English history. It's been here for so many centuries, and it's such a beautiful flavour, and we really wanted to capture that. Interestingly, when you ferment the Orion grape, often if you've got slightly higher ripenesses, then there's a quince component to the flavour profile when you make the wine. Um, and we recognized this connection. And so that gave us this idea of maybe bringing the two together. But the best way for us, we found the simplest way of capturing this flavor of the quince was simply to put it in with the eau de vie. And and it creates a lovely drink.
That's lovely. Yeah.
We also make the we've start with so this year we're just about to release a dessert wine which is made from Solaris, partially fermented through to about 6%, and then with the eau de vie de vin added to it,
Oh,
to lift it up to a point where it kills the yeast up to about 17%, 18% alcohol. Um, and we made that last year as an experiment, and that's turned into something really delicious. So
sounds,
yeah,
yeah.
we sort of will be releasing that soon. No, none of this was planned at all. So yeah, we had this idea of making a mixture of cider and wine, or putting the fermenting some um, some of the wine with some apple, or maybe fermenting some apple juice into cider on the skins of grapes, that sort of thing. But none of it's happened. I think all of those have wonderful possibilities, but they for us, we definitely follow our hearts and our intuition, and yeah, this is the direction that it's taken us.
That's lovely. Um, yeah, I mean, are there any other wine? I mean, I think you've talked about some of pretty much everything that you make. Is that true?
Um, yeah,
Are
we
there,
make three at the moment, three pet nats. We've got a few still wine experiments, and some they're all amber wines. And yeah, we'll be making I think we made one. We'll make two dessert wines. I think this harvest, hopefully. Uh, I think interesting when you were asking about the Rondo. I think that we haven't made it with the Rondo, but this year we'll make a dessert wine with. It's a Vin Doux Naturel. That's the type of dessert wine it is. Um, we'll try that with the Rondo grape this year, because the Rondo grape tastes amazing, but the wine that you make when it's fully fermented doesn't have the sort of the depth and the quality that the grape has. So if you have a partially fermented Rondo, you still retain some of those grape qualities. So I think it would make quite a nice Vin Doux.
beautiful.
Who knows where it's going to go in the end? I mean, yeah. We've got a second vineyard coming online this year, so we've got another
Oh, great.
1,200 vines.
I was going to ask. So yeah, everything that you make is from the 4 acres that you're growing currently, right?
That's right, yeah.
So, um, but you're adding. Yeah, that wasn't enough. You're not busy enough with those 4 acres. Is that right?
Well, it's 4 acres of land. It's
Oh,
1.7 acres of vines.
gotcha.
So the rest, as I said, was habitat. The idea is, and actually this linked really nicely in with one of your recent podcasts with the investor.
Yeah,
I can't remember her name, but that was such an
sure. Yeah.
interesting interview. Um, because there's this lovely connection between business, business sense, the figures, and all the logical aspects of it, and sort of spirituality and health of the planet. And I thought that was really something that people don't talk about enough. Is that how you make a business work in that way, in that beneficial way, that is not just good for the environment, but also good for your spirit and for your soul. So yeah, thank you for doing that. I thought that was a fantastic podcast.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
but yeah, the I think the way that sort of relates to the way that we work is when we how to say it. Part of it comes back to this idea of the farm, the vineyard as a living organism, that we consider the people who buy the wines and come to the vineyard as part of that. So people come and they taste the wines and they bring joy and they bring their own happiness and their own personality to the land and to the vines. But also, there's this business connection in that we usually only sell to businesses that come and visit us. So
Mm,
we we'd like to know everybody who sells the wine because we don't have a huge amount. The idea is that we can actually know everybody who buys the wine in order to sell on. That is not direct sales. Um, and so that kind of we're building up this business in a slow way from a small amount to start with. Uh, the idea being that one person can care for the vineyard and make the wine from one field. We have a second field. The second person, i.e., Georgina, my wife, she together we can run two fields and make the wine and sell the wine, and still know everybody that buys it. And that scale is, um, I think, a really healthy scale. So
mm,
if we go any more than that, we'll have to employ people, and then we'd have to lift it quite a lot bigger, and then suddenly
right.
you become a manager.
Right.
But that for us, we've worked out is about 3,000 vines, um, and that probably works out at about 3,500 to 4,000 bottles, possibly. And then along with the sort of tours that we do and the talks and that sort of thing, that should give us just enough money to live. That's the thinking behind that. So that's a very roundabout way of explaining where that second field's come from, because that it gives us this sort of enough, but not too much. That's the idea.
I my goodness, I am so there's so many things in what you just said that I connect with. And so you're what will the total acreage planted be once you have that 3,000 vines?
Um, Acreage,
Or is it, I mean,
probably
how many vines do you have currently?
1,800.
Okay,
So
so
we're
you're
adding 1,200.
gotcha. You
Um,
have
and there are acres. I think the first vineyard we got 1.7. It's probably about probably about 1.2, about 1.2 acres.
okay,
So it'll be
great.
about 3 acres altogether. Yeah,
That's
and
amazing.
the total land area is about 9 acres. So, yeah, the second vineyard at the moment. I know this is not a video, but it would be if you were here. It is a series of sort of four small blocks of vines in the centre of a wildflower meadow, and the meadow is just beautiful. There are tens of thousands of orchids in this
Oh,
meadow at the moment, and it's just a beautiful place. Yeah, I can just walk through it and kind of ignore the vines, just look at the flowers.
yeah. I know the feeling. I know the feeling. Do you do any other production of food or beverages from your land? Just whether personal or or commercial.
We don't do anything commercial. We have quite a lot of hazel trees. We have a lot
Oh,
of blackberry. So we have a lot of. We've planted a small quince copse, 15 more quince trees,
okay.
but nothing commercial. The wildflower meadow gets cut by a local farmer, an organic dairy farmer, and he takes the because he's organic. It's really hard for him to get hold of any organic hay for his cattle. So he cuts it for free, and then gives it the cattle, and then we can take, if we ever need any manure, we can take some manure from that's been made from our land, uh, which is made on a different farm through his cows. So that's a really nice, as another sort of example of the expanded farm organism as an idea,
That's nice.
to
Yeah.
include other businesses.
And
But no, we grow our own vegetables a little bit on the land, in the garden, because we were lucky enough to live here as well. But
yeah,
nothing beyond that.
and well, you keep saying we. Do you want to mention your partner in this?
Yeah, Georgina. Yeah, so we're married. We got married here, amazingly, on the vineyard.
Oh,
Uh,
beautiful.
so yes, she comes from a background of originally of journalism, and then she worked for the BBC making documentaries, and then she moved into landscape architecture,
Beautiful.
and that's where we met because that's I used to be a landscape architect, and then when we got together, we decided that we'd like to work together. So we tried out a couple of things just to see if that was feasible, if we could manage to do that. And then in the end, we decided on a vineyard, and so that's where it kind of started. That's where I love. That's where the vineyard started. Was in that sort of dream of wanting to work together, because neither of us come from a vineyard background. We both come from sort of ecology, nature, sustainability, that sort of background, which I think has been incredibly beneficial. Actually,
Yeah.
we've both come at this without knowing anything about wine and anything about vines, which has allowed us to not have any preconceptions of what we should be doing. Yeah, which has been, I think, has been very, very definitely the best thing we did.
Lovely. Well, this is kind of a fun question, and I can cut it out if necessary. But I happen to be talking to you on America's Independence Day, 4th of July, and you're my first English interview. There's
uh,
something very fun about that, and maybe ironic, or but I guess the thing that I have mentioned many times, in just talking about wine and the global wine culture that exists is the immense influence that England has had on it, and and I mean specifically on the culture that I've grown up in as well, and on many cultures around the world, of course. But specifically this idea of, we think about like the Court of Master Sommelier and Wine and Spirits Education Trust, and so much of what gets disseminated as the official wine definitions, and the assumptions that most people make when they hear the word wine come from very English ideas. And I just wonder if you had any thoughts on that from within the empire.
within the empire. Oh dear. Just as an aside, before I answer that,
Yes.
it's a general election here today. Actually,
Oh my
on
god.
American Independence Day, we're electing a new government in England. Uh, I
Good
don't know
luck.
what. I'm not sure what that means, but I think I have. Yeah, I have also. I mean, obviously, there's so much which is shameful. I think in English history,
Mm,
and it's led, and I think there's something. There are remnants of that in English culture still, whether they are acknowledged or not acknowledged. And I think you're absolutely right that there is this influence in wine culture. Um, I don't know the extent around the world, but yeah, obviously with the WSET, um, yeah, that sort of standardized teaching of what wine should be, what
right.
wine is and what it should be is, yeah, I think it's a bit. I mean, it's a bit embarrassing, to be honest, from a personal perspective. Um, and I think, yes, I could. I think if I was younger, I would probably rail against it. Um, and I think I can recognise the problems that it's caused and is still causing, and I see it in the English wine industry now. So when you look at the statistics of English vineyards, people have been planting vines. They haven't been planting vines for very long in England. It's a new thing. About 70% of the vines planted in England are the champagne varieties. So it's trying to be
Hmm.
something that it's not, but it's trying to be something that was really sort of that is so valued historically. So
Yeah.
it's almost like it's trying to sort of tag on to an existing historic culture. Um, and I think that is such a mistake. And I think that's emblematic of what you're talking about is this kind of odd cultural influence that England has. It's still in some ways it's still stuck in the past. In some ways it's not. It really isn't. I think food culture, for example, in England is absolutely amazing now. It's some of the best in the world.
Mm.
But in some ways, yes, it is. It is a bit sort of stuck in the past as well. Um, but I think I would have railed against that when I was younger. But I remember Monty Wald. Do you know Monty Waldin, the biodynamic wine writer?
Yeah, yeah.
He he.
Just the
I've done some
Italian wine
workshops with
stuff.
him. That's right. Yeah, yeah. And he gave me some advice when we were just starting out. He said, "Talk about what you tell people about what you do. Don't tell people about what you don't do."
Yeah,
And I just and it stuck with me that
yeah,
advice that I'm really happy to tell people about what we do and why we do it and how it's done and really celebrate that. And but I don't want to see it as um, sort of in opposition to an existing culture. I
yeah.
think it's so special about being here in this place and it's celebrating that. And I think people get that. And as soon as you start talking about um, other things that are being done badly, I think I sort of people tend to lose interest if nothing else. And there's so much joy and so much celebration to be had, and that's what people remember, and I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, that
I'm
is.
not sure if that answered your question or not, but
Oh, that was beautiful. Anything you said, I appreciate. Yeah, I have no comment. I just wanted to, yeah, get your thoughts. I thought it would be a fun question, but I think you answered beautifully. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And yeah, is there anything else that we haven't mentioned that's important for people to know about what you're doing, or any, you do classes and workshops online, so people are, if they're interested in learning more specifically about biodynamics, you teach some workshops about that. Please talk about that. But if there's anything, because you're an educator, that you've been thinking about lately, or that you've noticed, I guess my question for you, because of that, in addition to just like how people could sign up, but what are the what are the things that you find most people who come to your workshops, like what are some of the or maybe like one or two of the most important sort of aha moments that you're able to make for people who are being introduced to these ideas?
Mm. S- yeah, so that's I think there's one thing which it comes through more and more strongly in all of the more in the work that I do in the vineyard, but also very much in the teaching, and that is I've mentioned it a few times, is this idea of the land as a living being, because that everything is guided by that. The more I understand it, the deeper I understand it, the more I realize that everything that you do can be guided by that. So this idea that it's you're sort of supporting this being to help it grow, help it achieve its potential, it needs to be part of a bigger system, and you're trying to create that system which is healthy. So you're trying to, you're working with it to make wine, to bring life to it, to bring people to it, to sell, to allow the sort of the energy of money to feed it and to draw out again to feed other people. and bring beneficial emotion to it, and allow that to come into the wine, which brings lovely emotions for the people who drink the wine, and so on. Everything revolves around this idea that you've got this sort of living organism that you're caring for, right through into the business aspect of it, and then the recognition that this being has a spirit, and you can connect to it on a deeper level, on a spiritual level, a personal and emotional, meaningful level. And I think that suddenly suffuses everything that you do around connected with the vineyard. And I think that's the big, I think, aha moment, as you put it. It's that point where you realize that is the way that everything is connected. And it's not an abstract idea out in the universe. It's not a concept you're trying to grasp. It's the reality of walking on the land, of dealing with people, of working with the vines, caring for the soil. It's the reality of it, it's the physicality of it, that makes all of that happen. So it's not an abstract, esoteric concept which you're trying to grasp theoretically. It's a way of living, a way of being, which affects everything that you do. And of course, simply on a wine level, that means that there's greater and greater concentration of place in the wine. So everything's focused on the land, which gives it that very beautiful sense of place. So that's quite a thing. I suppose a simple example is we collect oak bark, dandelion, nettle, comfrey, horsetail, valerian, yarrow, willow, all from the land. And we make teas from that, and that's what helps support that being, support the vines. So everything that goes into the grapes is coming only from the land. And I think that when you say that to people, they suddenly get, that's what terroir is. Now I understand. And it isn't about all the other things that you might be bringing on. I think that's usually the one, particularly because most people who come on the course obviously have an interest in wine, so they recognize what terroir kind of is, and that's the moment when they realize what it actually is.
That's lovely. So thank you. Your website is limeburnhillvineyard.co.uk.
That's right, yes.
Is that the best place? Well, you also have Instagram. Anything?
Yeah, Instagram's probably has all the more regular stuff.
At Limeburn Hill, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Great.
And I run the online course in Introduction to Biodynamic Viticulture. That we do that once a year. That's in conjunction with the Biodynamic Agriculture College. So if you look, there's a link to it on our website, or if you looked up on Google, Biodynamic Agriculture College UK, there'll be a link to the course there. And then we do the odd one-day workshop on wine growing, so that includes the winemaking, sort of a very basic introduction to biodynamics and biodynamic winemaking as well. We do that on the farm once a year as well.
Well, thank you so much, Robin. It's been a real pleasure to get to know what you are up to. It's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's really it's an honor. I would say it's an honor.
Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I want to thank all of you who support this podcast through donations, Patreon subscriptions, sponsorships, or just posting a great review and telling a friend. You make this podcast possible, and I'm honored and humbled and inspired by your support. If you'd like to support this podcast, you'll find links to all the ways you can support it in the show notes.